Mr. Bernd Sieker will speak about the crashes and what led to the crashes of the most recent 737 model. He is a flight safety, no, he's an engineer, and he also worked on flight safety, and he analyzed plane crashes for a lot of time and a long time. And you have to keep in mind that this 737, although multiple models have been built, can be flown. All models can be flown with the same type rating since 1967, which is one of the many root causes of the issues that led to the disaster that killed 346 people. Let's listen to Bernd, and he'll enlighten us what else went wrong.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. I see there are not quite as many people as with the Edward Snowden talk, but I'm not disappointed. Aviation safety has always been very important to me, and I've done a lot of work on it, and I'm happy to share my passion with so many of you. Thank you. So here's basically the outline of what I'm going to talk about. It's the Boeing 737 MAX, or 737, as some may say. I will briefly talk about the accidents, what we knew at the beginning, what went wrong, and then what came to light later on. I will show our causal analysis method that we use very shortly, very briefly, and the analysis, an overview of the analysis that I did of these accidents. Then talk about the infamous MCAS system, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, as it's called by its full name. Then I'll talk about certification, how aircraft certification works in the United States. It's very similar in Europe, although there are some differences, but I'm not going to talk about European details in this talk. So it's mostly about the FAA and aircraft certification across the pond. Some other things, and an outlook how it is going to go on with the Boeing 737 MAX. We currently don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we'll see. And if we have time, there are a few bonus slides later on. So the Boeing 737 MAX, the star of the show, as you may say. It's the fourth iteration, as the Herald already indicated, of the world's best-selling airliner. Right? I think I looked it up just recently. I think there are almost 15,000 orders there have been for the 737 of all the series, the original, the classic, the NG, and now the MAX. And the MAX itself is the fastest selling airliner of all time. So within months, it had literally thousands of orders. It has now almost 5,000 orders, the 737 MAX. And all the airlines in the world are waiting for the grounding to be lifted so they can receive and fly the aircraft. So the first accident was last year. It was a Lion Air Indonesian flag carrier. Actually, I think the second or third largest Boeing 737 MAX customer in the world, with a couple hundred, 250 or something aircraft. And it crashed relatively shortly after it entered service. And so we heard some strange things in the news and on the forums that deal with aviation safety. It seems that there had been uncommanded nose-down trim. So the tailplane is moved by an electric motor, and it forces the nose of the aircraft down. The pilot can counter that movement with some switches on his control column. And apparently the stick shaker was active during the flight, and there were difficulties in controlling the aircraft. We didn't know at the time exactly what it was. And then for the first time, the abbreviation MCAS surfaced. And even 737 pilots, even 737 MAX pilots, at least some of them said they'd never heard of it. It was a mystery. We later found that actually in some documentation it was very briefly mentioned that such a system existed, but not exactly why it was there. And I guess Boeing knew, and the certification authorities, as it turned out, sort of knew a bit of the story, but not the whole story. But especially people in the West, in the US, and in other countries said, oh, these are just poorly trained third world pilots, and we expect that. And they weren't completely wrong. Lion Air has a particularly bad safety record, and it wasn't unknown to aviation safety investigators. There have been a number of crashes with Lion Air. So in the beginning, we thought, okay, maybe it's a fluke, it's a one-off, or maybe it's caused by poor maintenance or bad pilots or whatever. So several people, on the other hand, already began worrying because some flight data recorder traces became public, and there were some very strange things which we will see shortly. And then only a few months later, the second aircraft of exactly the same type and the same variant, Boeing 737 MAX 8, also crashed. And you can see it maybe on the picture on the left, it left a rather big crater. It really dove into the earth quite fast. It turned out, I think, about between 700 and 800 kilometers per hour, so really fast. And not much was left. I think the biggest parts were about this size, I guess. So all small pieces of debris, and the engine cores, which are a bit bigger. And from that as well, flight data recorder traces became public. The recorders had survived, at least the memory in them, and were readable. So we finally found out something and found some similarities, some rather disturbing similarities. We'll come to that in a moment, but I'll talk a little bit about the Boeing 737 family in general. So there were 4, as I said, models. There was the original, which had narrow engines under the wings, not a lot of room between the ground and the engines, but it looked quite normal, you could say. It was one of the first short-haul airliners with underslung engines under the wings. Then new high-bypass turbofan engines entered the market, which were much more fuel efficient. We're talking about maybe some 15 to 20% lower fuel consumption, so it was a big deal. And the Boeing 737 was re-engined and became known as the Classic. Bigger engines, but still mostly analog mechanical instruments. And it was basically the same as the original, instead that it had some bigger engines. They had to shape the cowling a little differently to accommodate the bigger engines, but more or less it worked for a while. And then as airlines demanded more modern avionics, so the cockpit electronics in aircraft, the next generation was conceived. It also got a new wing, new winglets, which again saved